Okay, so now we're officially recording. I want to do something that we have not done before at all in this class, and we do it a lot in the other classes. But I want to start reading that introduction to neoliberalism's war on higher education, and I want to read it together. I want to read the introduction together, and I want people to take turns reading it, and so that we can just start unpacking it. Because I think after everything is said and done, I was thinking about it. I was thinking about it as I was rereading Giroux, writing, just a few years ago, and the introduction to neoliberalism's war reads so much like this kind of update of everything that we've read prior, but it's creepier to the degree that it's not creepier, but it's like just more ominous to the degree that now we're talking about how it directly affects you as students, you as potential people in the job market, and what the world looks like in 2020. And also, once again, with this whole thing of the spectacle, and what he has to say about the goals of neoliberalism in lieu of the pandemic. Remember, he wrote this about 5 or 6 years ago, before the election of Trump and the pandemic. But he's written a lot of things since about it, but how once again it's like prescient, it's like the red pill. He's Canadian. He's up at McMaster. Actually, he's American, but he teaches up at McMaster University up in Canada. So I mean, he's got an interesting take on what's going on in the U.S. right now, from just due to being across the border. You know, but I think that the term neoliberalism is not understood by a lot of people, especially outside of academia. What does it mean? Because I think a lot of people take the liberal part and think it means something that has to do with like liberalism, like traditional progressive slash left liberalism, and that's not. And actually, the term really means something very, very different, and it comes out of it. It initially comes out of a rethinking of what Adam Smith has to say about free markets and capitalism. And this is after, remember, after the New Deal, after JFK, after the Lyndon Johnson's great great revival, all of this helping, all of this like government assistance to the struggling, like, lower classes and working classes. Remember, we talked about like how how Roosevelt invented Social Security and unemployment and welfare and all these things, and how by the 60s and 70s, the right in this country, primarily like spearheaded by the top earners, the people with the most money, like started this counter force to really strip away a lot of what they called the welfare state. All right. And they called it neoliberalism. All right. And it's hooked into a couple of different writers and thinkers that you need not know or remember, but you're going to want to read probably at some point. It actually starts in the University of Chicago's economics department. A guy by the name of Milton Friedman was there, who was considered at his time like the Einstein of macroeconomics, if such a thing exists. And a lot of people would become students of Milton Friedman, and there was this whole kind of resurgence in this idea of the individual and getting away from government restraint. And it was really an ideology that was launched by it was an ideology that was launched by the really affluent to undo a lot of the regulations that were, making them like, that were keeping them like rich, but prohibiting them from becoming super rich. That's that's the entire thing in a nutshell. All right, the rich, the top income tax brackets in this country were not satisfied with what had been taken away from them in order to, assist in all this economic unrest. You know, the economic unrest, by the way, that the very system had caused. We've already been through this. That capitalism, that industrial capitalism has, for most of its history, been unstable. And led to like real downturns and depressions and putting a lot of people out of work. So by the 1980s, there's a whole government, there's a whole flavor of government policies that starts to spring up around this idea of rethinking the free market and wanting to undo all this like government regulation, which was called Keynesian economics. John Maynard Keynes had come along and had been an economic theorist that talked about the idea that the market left unrestrained would always produce problems unless there was some kind of give and take, some kind of tug of war that went on between the regulatory mechanisms of the state or government and the free market, and that the best of both possible worlds was one where there was at least some provisions to like keep an eye on, like unrepentant, like unchecked capitalism, and rightly so. And now it's like, now we bear the fruit of this. All right. We can see what neoliberalism has done to us, to the planet, to our country, to the jobs. All right. But it's a term that started getting used in academia around the 1990s to imply this move from the welfare state, the welfare state of the Great Society of LBJ and FDR, to economic management, particularly associated with the promotion of free market ideas in the late 1980s. All right. And the two people that come along that really become the real cheerleaders for this and start to implement these policies, moving us away from this like big, it's like you hear conservatives and Republicans, one of their strategic talking points is always about big government. Big government is the cause of all the ills that we currently suffer, and it's like it's kind of like one of those talking points like the liberal media, which we like pretty much took apart in the other class when we talked to Adam Schiffer last week. So it starts in the UK and the US, which the UK and the US at that point are two of the primary economic superpowers. It's like we're talking about the Soviet Union falling apart. So the UK and the US are pretty much at the top of the heap. Japan is in the running at that time, as becoming like, the third, this kind of outlier that, the Japanese economy has this meteoric rise in the 80s, and then for a lot of different reasons, it kind of falls apart. And then there's all the big guns, there's the members of, the EC that were back and doing well. But we have to understand what neoliberalism really is and how it is defined, all right? And here's some of my talking points about it that I felt were important to talk about, right? What does neoliberalism stress? One, free, unregulated trade between international corporate actors, all right? It's like a system of global economics and globalization that is not impinged upon by your local sovereign governments. That It's like American-based countries can trade with whoever they want in whatever way they see fit, and should do it without the government like stepping in. So the whole idea of minimal government intervention and this idea of the free market, because remember that this whole idea of free market capitalism is predicated on this idea that it's a system of management of the economy which will always correct itself. It was predicated on this idea that whatever imbalance, there would always be some internal forces to its structure that if it was having a bad day, the market would recorrect itself, just out of sheer self-preservation for itself. So it's this perfect example of something taking on these anthropomorphic qualities, this total abstraction, as an idea that becomes a thing, and not in like the way that corporations have now become persons, but it's all just kind of about semantics, right? Number three, reduction of taxation. Want to lower taxes. Conservatives, Republicans are always talking about bitched and moaned for 30 or 40 years about taxes. All right. And it's usually, but we have to be clear, it's usually about the taxation of the rich, and it's often predicated on this belief that unimpeded economic growth ultimately benefits all citizens and leads to job growth. And it was called trickle down economics. And some of you probably know that phrase from your parents or whatever. There was this whole idea that if you left the economy to just grow and do it in a way that was just don't mess with it, that companies would rise up and entrepreneurs would expand and scale, and there would be jobs, right? And they would, by their very name, there was this mythology that due to this accumulation of wealth and growth, the jobs would be that a plenitude of jobs would be the natural. It was almost like they almost looked at it as like the sun coming up in the morning. Well, of course there would be jobs, However, we've already been down this road about how this level of growth, how they offset the creation of jobs by doing certain things, right? Outsourcing, automation, like getting rid of like part-timeism, adjuncts, all this nonsense, right? Number four, the belief that the individual, there was this whole stress on the individual. Margaret Thatcher, the prime minister of Great Britain, is famous for having said that there is no such thing as society. She said there are only individuals. There are only individuals, plying your trade and making it in this world, and you have a God-given right to, to become as affluent as luck will have it, or the whole idea of like the self-made man, that if you, it's like, this whole like idea of competition, and that if you make $100 million, if you make $200 billion, then you must have earned it by hook or by crook. It's like, this idea of freedom that's limited to the financial, the freedom to make as much money as humanly, and fuck all. Really, isn't that what it's about? Number five, a belief. So this idea of the employer-employee relationship being this kind of inviolable contract. All right, agree. It's like, for instance, you go in and you get a job, right? Well, it's like, under the auspices of neoliberalism, right? The employee is free to do and pay you whatever, it's like, he or she is restricted by certain laws, that had been put in place, but he can pay you. It's like, if you agreed to go into a place and work for $7 an hour in 2020, it's like, and you make that agreement, you know it's like that would be the agreement, and that the employee offers that. Once you agree to the terms of employment, the employer offers as subject to the dictates of the employer. Ideally, it's predicated on the idea that the employer is free to utilize the employee in any way that he sees fit, right? The employer is king. If he wants to move you to another department that you hate, tough shit. If he wants to not give you a raise, tough shit. If he wants you, it's like, if you don't want to work in a certain room in a high-tech place because you read some articles that it might not be safe, tough shit. It's like, you do what the employee tells you to do. It's like, that's why, that's why I've always talked about the idea that we believe in this country, we believe in democracy and democratic institutions everywhere except where? Except the workplace, right? It's like it's a dictatorship, right? So it's like so you negotiate, and you agree to whatever the employer is offering, and whatever the health and safety regulations are, additional employee benefits such as health insurance, 401k. Um, you know, the neoliberalists believe that this stuff should be kept at a minimum for maximum growth, right? The whole idea being maximum growth as being like the raison d'etre, the reason for everything, like this unchecked, and that, and that if the company made enough money, of course they would be they would be altruistic enough to take care of you, whether it be health insurance. There was this whole idea of paternalism for a while, all right, where there was still this kind of shred of ethical responsibility on the level of like a CEO, like even at places in the Triple Cities. The two guns for a while were IBM and Endicott Johnson, and they felt, and it was this age of what they called paternalistic companies, where they felt this kind of moral obligation to make sure that your kids had health insurance, to make sure that you had a house, that you were like your living conditions were all right, to make sure that this, that, and the other thing, but this ideology of it's like your company can only be as good as your workers, and if you're shorting them, or if they're just getting sick and they got no insurance and they can't pay for it, then it's like it's a loss for you. That kind of paternalistic thinking gradually shrunk in the 70s and 80s, and a lot of those things just got too expensive is what happened, and the people at the top were like, you know what, we don't have to give these guys raises, we don't have to give them pensions, we don't have to give them 401ks, we'll just ship this stuff out because we got the money to do it. Number 6, privatization of all public municipal institutions, right? Privatization is a big one, right? Privatizing sanitation, privatizing construction of the infrastructure, privatizing schools, privatizing your water and utilities, in the belief that market values, all right, this is the belief, all right? None of this stuff comes without some kind of rationalization, all right? The belief that if you privatize, say, your sewage treatment plant, if you privatize your school, it will lead to competition, right, in the marketplace. Hence, there will be a higher quality, right, because people will be competing, all right, and there'll be innovation due to the fact that there will be competition. That's usually not the way it works out, right? I want to bring up, so what's the real deal? What's the deal that we all have come to know and love? I think it's best summed up in an article that I just want to read. I want to share the screen for a minute. I can't do it. Okay. I don't even need to share audio, but this, it comes out of the Guardian, all right? And I think just reading like the first page of it will help us really nail down like what neoliberalism, macroeconomics purported to do, starting in 1980 or thereabouts, and what it actually ended up doing, and it goes something like this. Financial meltdown, environmental disaster, and even the rise of Donald Trump. Neoliberalism has played its part in them all. All right. This is from The Guardian, by the way. All right. This is from the major British newspaper. This isn't from Breitbart. This isn't from some far left, mouthpiece. This isn't from some radical journal. It's from The Guardian. All right. Who are traditionally, somewhat moderate, Imagine if the people of the Soviet Union had never heard of communism. The ideology that dominates our lives has, for most of us, no name. Mention it in conversation and you'll be rewarded with a shrug. Even if your listeners have heard the term before, they will struggle to define it. Neoliberalism. Do you know what it is? Its anonymity is both a symptom. Please don't tell me this is frozen up on me, because I'm going to be very, very mad. All right. This is frozen up on me. Lovely and lovely. Can you see? All right. Let's just bounce out for a minute. Let me bounce out and see if I can't bounce back in. And let's get our cameras on, please. I don't have to even share the audio here. Let's see if I can't get back into this. Hold on. It just... Please come back. Please. Okay. Can you guys see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Its anonymity is both a symptom and a cause of its power. It has played a major role in a remarkable variety of crises. The financial meltdown of 2007 and 8, the offshoring of wealth and power that we already talked about, of which the Panama Papers offer us merely a glimpse. Anybody ever heard of the Panama Papers? We'll talk about that. Yeah, it was just basically this total indictment of like how all the super rich were like, where they were hiding their money, and it was like insane. And it was all illegal. And it involves celebrities, all right? That's all you gotta know about it. Offer us merely a glimpse of the slow collapse of public health and education, resurgent child poverty, the epidemic of loneliness, the collapse of ecosystems, the rise of Donald Trump. But we respond to these crises as if they emerge in isolation, apparently unaware that they have all been either catalyzed or exacerbated by the same coherent philosophy, a philosophy that has or had a name. What greater power can there be than to operate namelessly? Okay, so pervasive has neoliberalism become that we seldom even recognize it as an ideology. We appear to accept the proposition that this utopian, millenarian faith describes a neutral force, a kind of biological law, like Darwin's theory of evolution. But the philosophy arose as a conscious attempt to reshape human life and shift the locus of power. Does it sound like somebody else we've read, the beginning at least? Let's reread it. So pervasive has neoliberalism become that we seldom even recognize it. Sounds a little bit like Berger, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When he talks about advertising, how it's just become an element of our environment and we just take it for granted. We don't question it. We just don't question it. It's like that pervasive, right? And then the writer goes on, neoliberalism sees competition as the defining characteristic of human relations. It redefines citizens as consumers, whose democratic choices are best exercised by buying and selling. All right, that's where your democracy gets exercised. A process that rewards merit and punishes inefficiency. It maintains that the market delivers benefits that could never be achieved by planning. Attempts to limit competition are treated as inimical to liberty. Tax and regulation should be minimized. Public services should be privatized. The organization of labor and collective bargaining, that means labor unions and trade unions, are portrayed as market distortions that impede the formation of a natural hierarchy of winners and losers. A natural hierarchy of winners and losers. Inequality is recast as virtuous, a reward for utility and a generator of wealth, which trickles down to enrich everyone. Meaning what? You get the crumbs off the table, right? It's like, if someone gets rich, it's like, they're gonna be so rich that they can't help but throw you a few crumbs, right? Everyone wins. Efforts to create a more equal society. What are you saying?
The richer get rich and the poor get poorer.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Efforts to create a more equal society are both counterproductive and morally corrosive. All right. Efforts to create a more equal society are counterproductive, right? Because equality always does what? It impedes like individual growth. When I got to give more of my money away, to take care of the school down the street, or to put into, or when there's no jobs and and they take some of my money, so that the people that were working for me before I cut them loose can eat. I get mad because I had to tighten my belt in order to be competitive. But then I get mad because I got to pay these things in order to make sure that the people that I cut loose don't die, right? And I'm mad at that. How dare you? How dare you make me pay for the people that I put on the street that don't die? Sorry about that. But here's efforts. Okay, the market ensures that everyone gets what they deserve, right? It's like if you earned it, you deserve it, you get to keep it, right? If you didn't earn it, well, we'll get to that. The rationalizing about why you're not Trump. The rationalizing of why you're not Jeff Bezos, or Elon Musk, all right? And what you did wrong to not become that. We internalize and we reproduce its creeds. The rich persuade themselves that they acquired their wealth through merit, ignoring the advantages such as education, inheritance, and class that may have helped to secure it, right? It's the old adage like about they used to say it about Bush, that they used to say it about um George H.W. Bush, that he was born on third base and he thought he hit a triple. That whole idea of being born on third base and thinking you hit a triple. The poor begin to blame themselves for their failures, even when they can do little to change their circumstances. It always becomes this, in this system, it always becomes this lonely, internalized problem about how you're just not putting out enough jobs on monster.com. You're not putting out enough. It's like, dude, if you can't find a job, you must not be doing what you need to. You got to step it up. You got to be putting more resumes out on monster.com, or you didn't take the right things. You didn't take, the teachers taught you wrong, or they tricked you into getting into a curriculum that was not going to pay you handsomely, right? It's like it always becomes this private issue that we suffer from, and we know what happens because of that. Because what's going on right now? Because a lot of people are going through this. All right, let's get back to that. We internalize and yeah, let's open the floor in a minute. Let me just finish this piece right here, all right? The rich persuade themselves that they acquire their wealth through merit, ignoring the advantages such as education, inheritance, and class that may have helped to secure it. The poor begin to blame themselves for their failures, even when they can do little to change their circumstances, right? Like when there's no jobs and you're hitting yourself over the head, and you're feeling like it's your fault and you've got 3 mouths to feed, and it's like, and then, it's like, say you're a systems engineer at Lockheed, and they lose a contract and they cut you loose and there's no other systems engineer jobs. So it's like, the unemployment office helps you find another job, but that job doesn't exist. Sooner or later, the unemployment will runs out. Next thing you know, it's like you're down at Home Depot. It's like, last year you were designing like, the rotors for like some like massive helicopter. This year you're wearing an orange vest, telling people where the fucking toilet seats are. All right, for $13 an hour. Because it's either that or die. It's either that or die. Never mind structural unemployment. If you don't have a job, it's because you are unenterprising. Never mind the impossible cost of housing. If your credit card is maxed out, you're feckless and improvident. All right? It's on you. Never mind that your children no longer have a school playing field if they've got fat. If it's your fault, it's not, it's like it becomes a question of taking public inadequacies and turning them into private failures. And this is what Giroux will talk a lot about. This is the mind fuck of it. This is why we're seeing what we're seeing, with people spinning out, with people going stir crazy, with people dying from alcoholism, drug abuse, suicide. All this stuff is a byproduct of feeling that you are not enough, and it plays itself out in every nook and cranny of social, psychological, and political life. How many marriages break up because the breadwinner just can't put out anymore? Literally, like, essentially, he just can't get it up financially anymore. How many times has that happened? In a world governed by competition, those who fall behind become defined and self-defined as losers. You didn't do something right. It's not the system. It's not the fact that the economy has collapsed. It's not the fact that the people that we believed were going to create the jobs actually sent the jobs over to like Bangalore. It's like, it's on us. It's like, this whole idea of internalizing the things that are public and democratic concerns. All right. So there's the beginning. This is the opening of this. So let's go to what Giroux's got to say. And what I want to do is I'm going to start reading first, but then I want people to take turn. How many people we got on board? By the way, I just wanted to say, not to be mean about this, but we had a really great guest speaker last week, and we had 6 students here. I know that I can't, like, it's not mandatory, but that was a little bit not cool. Anyway, whatever. That's my mild rant for today. But you can see it, but I'll put it online. I'll put it online. So let's go to Giroux. If he can. Can Bongiorno do this? You never know. You never know what he's gonna do. All right. Let's get to it. And I'm just gonna open it up in my browser because I think I'm just going to open it up in my browser too because it's just too small. It's too tiny. It's tiny.
Yeah, same.
Introduction: Neoliberalism's War on Democracy. And I want people to take turns, and I'm not going to take no for an answer. Um, Starts with a quote from James Baldwin, who was the famous African American civil rights writer, poet, um, author. He says, "It is certain in any case that ignorance allied with power is the most ferocious enemy justice can have." And then he goes on. I'm going to bring this up in my own browser, you guys, so that I can look at it.
Can you send us the link?
Huh?
Can you send us the
What?
link?
It's in the one of the emails he sent.
Yeah, you've got it as a download.
Got
Just
it.
look for it. Go to your email and put in Giroux. For decades, I'll start. 4 decades of neoliberal policies, this is written in 2014, have resulted in an economic Darwinism that promotes privatization, commodification, free trade, and deregulation. He's pretty much saying what we've already said. It privileges personal responsibility over larger social forces, reinforces the gap between the rich and poor, and by redistributing wealth to the most powerful and wealthy individuals and groups, and it fosters a model of public pedagogy, right, education, that privileges the entrepreneurial subject while encouraging a value system that promotes self-interest, if not an unchecked selfishness, all right? He's saying this of pedagogy. What he's saying here is that the system, due to the fact that the system, the overarching system, is so based on competitiveness and entrepreneurialism, he's saying that that trickles down into the ideology of the schools, right? That, nothing happens in a vacuum, right? Since the 1970s, neoliberalism or free market fundamentalism has become not only a much vaunted ideology that now shapes all aspects of life in the United States, but also a predatory global phenomenon that drives the practices and principles of the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization, transnational institutions, right? The big three, the people that are running, it's like the institutions that are running, the global economy, the global equivalence of what the Federal Reserve is in this country. Transnational institutions which largely determine the economic policies of developing countries and the rules of international trade. And here's where it gets
With
interesting. Yes, sir.
okay.
You were going to
With its
say?
theater of
Oh, did you
wait,
want to
go ahead.
start? Yeah, go on. Eight.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was sorry. There was a long pause, so I thought that was an indicator of
Oh,
all
okay.
right. So
Yeah,
I'll
why
jump
don't you
in.
start? Yeah, yeah. Like take on this paragraph, right?
All right. With its theater of cruelty mode of public pedagogy, neoliberalism as a form of economic Darwinism attempts to undermine all forms of solidarity capable of challenging market-driven values and social relations, promoting the virtues of an unbridled individualism almost pathological in its disdain for community, social responsibility, public values, and the public good. As the welfare state is dismantled and spending is cut to the point where government becomes unrecognizable, except to promote policies that benefit the rich corporations and the defense industry, the already weakened federal and state governments are increasingly replaced by what Xiao Beale?
Joel, yeah, Joel, I think Joel
Joel
Beal.
Beale
Yeah.
has called proliferating zones of social abandonment and terminal exclusion.
Okay, let's stop there for a minute. Let's take a look at what he's trying to say here, right? There's an ideology of, we've already talked about this ideology. And when you're the dominant ideology, what do you tend to do? You drive out. It's like when you're the big fish in the pond, you really want to stay the big fish in the pond. And any rhetoric or discourse or ideas
No.
that like will challenge that, specifically the ideas of community, because in this kind of unbridled individualism, what is the enemy of that? Community, right? Social responsibility. When you become responsible for for the things that are going on in your community, and you feel an ethical and moral obligation to at least pay some attention to the people that have become victimized by this ideology. All right. And almost pathological, and it's just saying, it's like, and I think he rightly calls it a kind of pathology, right? A pathology meaning it's almost like at this level, it's almost like a mental illness, right? And it's distinct because it's like it doesn't want to hear about community. It doesn't want to hear about social responsibility. It does not want to hear about public values, and it certainly doesn't want to hear about the public good. That's not what it's about. Those are all ideas that, if those ideas are implemented in policies that speak to those ideas, that takes money out of their pocket. They don't want to hear. They don't want to hear about any of that shit. All right. Do you want to go on, Aiden, and just do this next paragraph, and then we'll change?
Sure. All right. One consequence is that social problems are increasingly criminalized while social protections are either eliminated or fatally weakened. Not only are public servants described as the new welfare queens and degenerate freeloaders, but young people are also increasingly subjected to harsh disciplinary measures both in and out of schools, often as a result of a violation of the most trivial rules.
All right,
Another
let's stop there for a second. All right, let's just stop there for a second. Young people increasingly subjected to harsh disciplinary measures both in and out of schools, often as a result of violations of the most trivial rules. Have we all been there to some degree or another?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, my
You know,
parents.
well, I mean, think about what has happened in terms of the look at the landscape of public schools nowadays. The metal detectors, it's like the idea of having a cop on site. We never had a cop on site, all and I see it firsthand due to the fact that I'm in the public school subbing, right? I see the way things I see the way that things have turned into this like really well-oiled machine about the amount of time. It's like, if you're caught in the hall after the bell rings, man, it's like, and there's like always these frequent flyers that end up in the detention room and suspension. There's this fear that goes on. There's all this kind of there's this culture of fear that goes on about say, for instance, I mean, take something for example. I mean, and this is not an exaggeration, right? This is not an exaggeration of like maybe like a fourth grader like going, to one of his classmates and going like this. And the next thing you know, he's down where? He's down in the principal's office. They got the school psychologist there. They're calling the parents because he went like this. All right. Or worse, brought a toy gun in. This over determination. of this. Aiden, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, this like extreme paranoia that involves getting cops. And when I was going to a college in North Carolina to get my GED, there was a police officer that was in the main area, and you couldn't go to any classes if you didn't show your school ID. And
Right,
I went there for months. I went there for months, and one day I forgot my wallet, and I was like, I went up to him. He's like, "Hey, ID," and I'm like, Man, I forgot my wallet," and he's like, "I'm sorry. It's just part of the whole thing." And it's like, you've seen me
right,
come in for months, but
right.
it's
I mean,
uh,
the rules don't allow for any kind of familiarity, for any kind of compassion. Like the fucking guy sees you every day. You think that it seems as if it's just when the machine just overtakes any sense of like of just common decency, just letting a few things go in the name of humanity. It's like he
Yeah.
sees you every day. It's like, what is it? What machine is running his game? And what consequences is he going to face for just giving you a pass, just as one human being to
Um,
another?
but at the same time, he could argue that he sees thousands of people every day and he doesn't really recognize you, right? So,
Yeah,
ah,
yeah, there's all that.
but
There's all of that.
yeah, but like,
But it's like,
I'm
it's
trying to
like,
find the other side of the argument.
the thing is though, is that there were guys. It wasn't that guy wasn't monitoring the school every day, and to be honest, there weren't very many students going anyway. Um,
right.
I don't know. I find it a little bit hard to believe that he wouldn't recognize a fair number of faces when he's looking at the person twice. He's looking at their actual face and then their ID,
It's like it's
for
Yeah.
like it,
6 hours.
it's like what we see. It's like what we've seen throughout. Certainly through the okay, you guys. What we've seen, and it's not like it was a cakewalk when I was a kid either. It's like there was a lot of it's like the old Pink Floyd side. It's like the old Pink Floyd song goes, man. There were some teachers there. There are people in the profession that get off like either humiliating you or doing something to make you feel bad. In fact, they probably get hired for it. They get hired for it. Because they got whether they were like there's a lot of like former Nazis like hiding like as like chemistry. It's like it's true. It's a joke, all right. It's a joke. But you know what I mean? It's like with every new incident, there was a new level of systematic repression that goes on, whether it be fear of terrorism. It's like think about 9/11 and think about Al Qaeda and think about the wars in Afghanistan and think about the initial waves of Muslim refugees that came into your school districts, right? And how they were treated and how they were, you know, and how they were sequestered, and how they were distrusted, you know. I mean, have any of you had that experience? Are any of you from, are any of you like expatriates from other countries? Well, we know what happened. So anyway, let's get back to like where we were here. We were talking about
Trivial
okay, and
revenge.
okay, can you go back to another characteristic?
Okay, yeah. Another characteristic of this crushing form of economic Darwinism is that it thrives on a kind of social amnesia that erases critical thought, historical analysis, and any understanding of broader systemic relations. In this regard, it does the opposite of critical memory work by eliminating those public spheres where people learn to translate private troubles into public issues. That is, it breaks the link between public agendas and private worries, the very hub of the democratic process. Once set in motion, economic Darwinism unleashes a mode of thinking in which social problems are reduced to individual flaws and political considerations collapse into the injurious and self-indicting discourse of character. Many Americans are preoccupied less with politics and moral outrage over a country whose economic and political system is in the hands of a tiny, exorbitantly rich elite than they are with the challenges of being isolated and surviving at the bottom of a savage neoliberal order. This makes it all the simpler for this makes it all the simpler for neoliberalism to convince people to remain attached to a set of ideologies, values, modes of governance, and policies that generate massive suffering and hardships. Neoliberalism's best trick is to persuade individuals as a matter of common sense that they should imagine themselves as solitary agents who can and must live the good life promised by capitalist culture.
Okay, let's pause there really quick and just pick apart a couple things here. I think one of the very important takeaways here is that he really kind of talks about this kind of democratic idea of this kind of hub between translating between public agendas and private worries, right? This idea that, it's like nothing occurs in a vacuum, and that a lot of times our lives, and the things that go on in our lives, in our homes, with our children, really have to do with policies of spending, how much you're making, how much money is being put into your school, is do you have a job that has any is your job rewarding in any kind of psychological or philosophical sense? Do you feel it's work that you want to do? Are your children being it's like, are your children being well educated? And then all this stuff starts to spin out, right? And then it's your fault, right? Then comes the character shit. Then comes what I call character assassination. you know it's like, it's like growing up, it's like how many, like, we saw, like, it's all that, like, bedroom communities behind closed doors where, like, I would have friends whose fathers were, like, making, like, good money as, like, upper level manager, IBM managers or engineers or whatever, living in suburbia, and at night, like, just drinking themselves to death down in their man cave, because they felt like their life was empty, but that's on hit, right? That's like, that's not addiction. That's not alcoholism. That's like, it's like, you're just being an asshole, right?
And I think
This
there's
whole
also
idea,
like a mentality of how now people talk about I think that there's a mentality now that's changed. Like people have been talking about mental health a lot more. Um, and people have been opening up about
yeah, I
their
agree.
issues rather than hiding
I
them.
I agree that there's some leverage in the disc. I mean, it's not the locked. It's not this, like, it's not the dark ages anymore to talk about the fact that opioid abuse has run rampant in suburbia, where it used to just be in the hood, where we're seeing this, like, massive, like, we're seeing these, like, huge upticks in, like, middle class, primarily men, and like teens, and like 20 somethings, like the rises in suicides and the rises in addiction that were usually the purview of minority communities are now, like, becoming, like, I mean, they're so in your face you can no longer talk about them. They're so in your face you can no longer talk about them. And it seems like for the last couple of weeks I just keep on getting this litany of calls from friends, or friends from across the country, that their girlfriends, like the other night, one of my best friends from California called me his girlfriend's 7-month-old, I mean, is her daughter is 7 months pregnant, and the boyfriend is killing himself with heroin. What are we gonna do? What should we do, Nick? You know, my sister-in-law calls me a week ago. You know, it's like, Nick, she's in tears. My brother is holed up in Johnson City, killing himself with booze. What can we do? You know, and and it's like, I'm all right to like use private anecdotes to talk about the ways in which this is all affecting us. You know, it's like, you know, it's not, if you know, it's like, and how we like, and how we try to like kind of keep it in the closet, like it's our fault, you know, as opposed to,
Yeah.
you know, a system that has like created such a feeling of hopelessness and despair, you know, and fear and paranoia, that the natural response would be to want to escape to one degree, or whatever your poison, right? Whether it be, you know, binge eating, whether it be anorexia, whether it be, you know, alcoholism, or, you know, just, you know, hiding out in games, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
Or, you know, even things like, you know, guys that work out too much, you know, you're living at the gym, you're just running from shit. You know, I know runners, like it's like, you know, as opposed to finding some kind of balance. But let's get back to it.
Uh, oh.
Okay, okay, we're at the top of page 3. Can
Yeah.
someone take over? Someone want to take over for Aiden?
I can do it.
Okay, top of page 3.
I got it. At George Lakoff and Glenn Smith, excuse me. As George Lakoff and Glenn Smith argue, the
They're two
anti-public
big guys we'll talk about later. I'm
philosophy
sorry.
of economic Darwinism makes a parody of democracy by defining freedom as the liberty to seek one's own interests and well-being, without being responsible for the interests or well-being of anyone else. It's a morality of personal but not social responsibility. The only freedom you should have is what you can provide for yourself, not what the public provides for you to start out. Put simply, we alone become responsible for the problems we confront when we can no longer conceive how larger forces control or constrain our choices and the lives we are destined to lead.
Right. Once again, we're into the cult of individualism, that, you know, it's like you're supposed to like pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, you know, not come up with excuses, suck it up, you know. But we have to remember something, you guys, and I need to like stress this, all right? The economic conditions in this country after World War II were radically different from where they are now, all right? And what we saw for 3 generations, this is a matter of it's like, it didn't take a lot. It wasn't like some triumph of the will to be in high school in the 60s or in high school in the 70s and go on to get a business degree, or get an engineering degree, or just getting a bachelor's degree in anything, and and finding a job that was going to pay you a living wage. You know, that was like the norm, and it happened for most of those between the baby boomer generation. You know, those people, you know, it's like, you know, let's not play games with it. It was mostly white guys, all right? But, you know, it's like that it didn't take a lot to get to, it's like, you know, it wasn't like this like savage struggle in the frickin' walking in the frickin' land of the dead to like pay your mortgage, you know, or send your kids to school, you know, and because the economic conditions were different, jobs were plentiful. Even if you didn't have a high school education, you go work down at the plant, they'll pay you $17, they'll pay you $20 an hour. You've got benefits. You've got a pension. You got a 401k. these generations before you, all right, are taking their social conditions of life, all right? And that's not to say that people didn't struggle, but there was like my father. My father was, you know, let me just use my father as an example. You know, it's like people struggled, you know, and I remember, you know, my father came out, he went and served in the army during the Korean War, and then he came out and he didn't know what he wanted to do. And he worked at General Electric for a while with my aunt, and he didn't like that, you know. And then he went down. This is why he's still in his 20s, by the way. And then he went down to like New York, and he worked. He worked as a construction worker, and he lived with my aunt B. And then he came back up here, and then he found a trade. All right, and then he found a trade. He was a mason. All right, and did he, you know, did he struggle? Yeah, but in each stage of the game, there was like jobs that were there that were waiting for him. He was just trying to figure out what he wanted to do. It was hard work, but he had a job. He never got fired. In the 30-something years that he was there, all he had to do is show up, you know, and it's like we were never, you know, we lived like this like middle class, like, you know, there was never a question of like near the end of my parents, like by the time that all this neoliberalism comes into play, that's when my parents start worrying about making ends meet. That's when my mother starts like, you know, walking, getting up at night, you know, like all upset because she thinks we're going to lose the house or something like that. But for most of my childhood, man, it was like not even a question of like not paying your bills, you know, or not having like Christmas money for Christmas, you know. But those social conditions that either your parents or your grandparents lived through, all right, where they weren't like just this total wasteland where there was no jobs and there was you know what I mean? There's a pandemic. So they want to take their work ethic and project it onto you know, even though we all know that the prevailing social conditions are dictating the fact that between the money that you can make out there, blah, 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 that it's like it's already a trend that you're not going to do. My generation, you started seeing it in my generation. We stopped doing as well as our parents, right? Then the generation that came after this, they stopped doing as well as their parents. Now you got 50% of the 19 through 24-year-olds in this country living back with their parents, not because they're lazy, not because they're stupid, not because they didn't go to the right schools or do the right things, just the fact that they took all the fucking jobs away, you know? But they want to, it's like, you got to watch what boomers try to do, projecting this shit onto you. You know what I'm saying with this? It's not all your fault, you know? It's part of the game, you know? And I'm sorry if I get heated about this, but all right, can we continue? Whoever was doing before, can we just continue? Yep.
Yet the harsh values and practices of this new social order are visible in the increasing incarceration of
So,
young people, the modeling of public schools after prisons, state violence waged against peaceful student protesters, and state policies that bail out investment bankers but leave the middle and working classes in a state of poverty, despair, and insecurity. Such values are also evident in the Republican Party's social Darwinist budget plans that reward the rich and cut aid for those who need it the most. For instance, the 2012 Romney/Ryan budget plan proposed to cut the taxes of households earning over 1 million by an average of 295,874 a year, or at a cruel
right,
cost to
right,
those disadvantaged populations who would rely on social programs in order to pay for tax reductions to benefit the rich. The Romney/Ryan budget would have cut funds for food stamps, Pell Grants, health care benefits, unemployment insurance, veterans benefits, and other crucial social programs. As Paul Grumman has argued, the Ryan budget isn't just looking for ways to save money, it's also trying to make life harder for the poor for their own good. In March 2012, explaining his cuts in aid for the unfortunate, Ryan declared, "We don't want to turn the safety net into a hammock that lulls able-bodied people into lives of dependency and complacency that drains them of their will and incentive to make the most of their lives."
All right, let's stop
Truman
right there
rightly
for a minute.
replied,
Can we stop right there for a minute, please? Thank you, though. All right, let's break it down a little bit. So there's a budget here. There's a budget proposal that goes on in 2012 that basically households earning over $1 million. At that time, it's like, my brother who's got a lot. It's like, I don't want to get into this, but a lot of people. There's people that think that $1 million is not a lot of money, but it's like it is a lot of money. All right, but this whole idea of cutting taxes for the rich and then where's the money going to come from? All right, if you're not getting the money for your infrastructure, for your social programs, for your tuition assistance like your Pell Grants, your health care, your unemployment insurance, veterans, if you're not getting it from one place and you can't get it from the other place because they got no money, what do? It's simple. It just goes away. If you can't afford something, it goes away because you've stopped like having that revenue stream to keep that thing up. All right. So let's continue to the end here of the thing of the page, please.
Krugman rightly replies, "I doubt that Americans forced to rely on unemployment benefits and food stamps in a depressed economy feel that they're living in a comfortable hammock." An extremist version of neoliberalism, Ryanomics is especially vicious towards U.S. children, 16.1 million of whom currently live in poverty. Marian Wright Edelman captures the harshness and savagery of the Ryan budget passed by the House of Representatives before being voted down in the Senate.
She writes.
She writes, Ryan economics.
Okay, you can go on.
Do
you want to go on?
Ryan economics all-out assault on our poorest children while asking not a dime of sacrifice from the richest 2% of Americans or from wealthy corporations. Ryanomics slashes hundreds of billions of dollars from child and family nutrition, health, child care, education, and child protection services. In order to extend and add to the massive Bush tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires at a taxpayer cost of $5 trillion over 10 years, on top of making Bush tax cuts permanent, the top income bracket would get an additional 10% tax cut. Millionaires and billionaires would on average keep at least an additional $250,000 each year and possibly as much as $400,000 a year, according to the Citizens for Tax Justice.
All right, let's just stop there for a minute, okay? So here we are, okay? And this is what we have to understand. All right? This whole idea of these like underlying assumptions that go along with these kind of tax cuts, these kind of tax breaks for the wealthy, and these guttings of social welfare programs that primarily affect kids, right? 16, as of the writing of this, 16.1 million who currently live in poverty, who did nothing to deserve it, and I'm sure now in 2020, I'm sure those statistics are through the roof, But once again, the value judgment, the implied assumed value judgments that undergird this economic national ideological policy that obviously these children, it's like in order to rationalize this system to oneself, either one needs to not think about how many people these policies are. It's either in order to go to sleep at night and be okay with this, you've got to put blinders on to those 16 those 16.1 million children that are going to bed hungry, all right? And I assure you that they are, all right? You can read anything you want about food insecure families in this country right now. You know, I had a motherfucker, excuse my French, you know, an academic, you know, bring to me these like WHO stats about that had to do with the mean caloric intake of just of American children, and said, no, there's nobody starving in this country, right? And he based it out, and he was like this kind of like technocrat that was like basing it all on this like one like empirical like standard of like, well, they're getting enough calories, so it's like it's just it boggles the mind. But we'll get into the ways that academics are fucking morons here too. We'll get there, okay? But not yet. So let's keep on reading. Do you want me to read for a little bit? Does somebody else want to read?
I can read a little bit.
Because we're almost running out of time. All right, yeah, let's like as profits soar.
Okay. As profits soar for corporations and the upper 1%, both political parties are imposing austerity measures that punish the poor and cut vital services for those who need them the most, rather than raising taxes and closing tax loopholes for the wealthy and corporations. The Republican Party would rather impose painful spending cuts that will impact the poor and vital social services. For example, the 2013 budget cuts produced by sequestrian slash $20 million from the maternal, infant, and early child home visiting program, $199 million from public housing, $6 million from emergency food and shelter, $19 million from housing for the elderly, and $116 million for higher education, and $96 million from homeless assistance grants. And these are only a small portion of the devastating cuts enacted. 70,000 children will be kicked off of Head Start. 10,000 teachers will be fired, and the long-term unemployed will see their benefits cut by about 10%.
And 10% is a lot. Let's not kid ourselves.
Oh, yeah. Under the right-wing insistence on a politics of austerity, Americans are witnessing not only widespread cuts in vital infrastructure and education and social protections, but also the emergence of policies produced in the spirit of revenge aimed at the poor, the elderly, and others marginalized by race and class. As Robert Reich, Charles Ferguson, and a host of recent commentators have noted, this extreme concentration of power is in every commanding institution of society, promotes predatory practices and rewards sociopathic behavior.
Okay,
Such
let's end. Okay, thank you, Aiden.
Yep.
I appreciate you reading. But I think that you know we need to end the session. But I think that what he does in this introduction, you know, in the beginning of the introduction, because by the second half of the introduction, we have to understand that these prevailing conditions we're going to start to understand how these prevailing ideologies, social conditions, and norms that we have accepted, all right, that have become acceptable in this kind of tacit blue pill, right, how it's trickled down into public education and the university system, and in what ways? What ways this ideology, because what Giroux is going to talk about is how this ideology has infiltrated the schools and the colleges, and in the ways in which it has done it. All right, the ways in which this ideology is both the driver and and the schools become part of, there's no part of this. It's a kind of a closed holistic system, all right, of each part. Think about it almost like think about it almost like a geodesic cube or a house of cards, right? It's like you pull one out, every one is influenced by every other one. All right. And if you pull one out, the whole thing collapses. So he's going to start talking about the card, the youth card, and the education card, and the ways in which this way of thinking is infiltrating and shaping, not just infiltrating. It's not like there's some foreign ideology that has crept into education, all right? It's not like that. The fact is that it shapes the whole thing, all right? It's not like somehow the corporate state got its hooks into the schools. The fact is that it's gradually just shaped the entire environment. What's taught, the way things are taught, the way things are structured there, the whole like shared structure of feeling is part of keeping this system running, all right? So that in my lecture on Thursday, I'll get more into the nuts and bolts of how this affects education, all right? So what questions do we have?
Are we meeting on Blackwood Collaborate on Thursday?
We're going to do a lecture on Thursday. Bongiorno's got to go to an oral surgeon on Thursday, so I don't think I can do this from like the chair. I don't think I can I don't think I can have this guy's hands in my. It's like if I could, I would. Do you want me to do it from there? Because it's like my appointment's at 12. It's like, I mean, it would kind of be cool. No, it's not
it
gonna
would
happen.
show a great deal of dedication.
Yeah. Hey, don't not. It's like, let me tell you something. Before we end here, I had a grad. It's like I had a grad professor, who's passed. His name was Tony Conrad, and he was like knocking on death's door near the time that I had him for grad seminar, and he would literally, and he a couple times like got it together enough to Skype out of his hospital bed. It's like that's not that I'm gonna do. Fuck that. I ain't doing that. It's like he was nuts, man. He was just nuts. So okay, so we're gonna do a lecture. I'm gonna put it up, and let's read. At the very least, I want to get through the first. I want to get through the introduction, chapter 1 and chapter 2 of this book, because I think that if we do chapters 1, 2, and 3, I think if we do the intro chapter and chapters 1 and 2, we'll get like a real robust picture that he starts to reiterate in the next chapters. But kind of like Society of the Spectacle, if you get a couple chapters, you get a picture, right? And we'll get a snapshot. And we'll get a snapshot of what's at stake, all right? And we also need to start thinking about how the things that Giroux says in terms of the poverty of student life now has changed, how the pandemic has kind of done what? Put another screw in, right? Another notch, another turn of the screw in terms of your rights, in terms of your psychic health, in terms of what you're living under and what you're paying for. So we'll talk about all that when we come back. All right.
Okay.
But lecture on Thursday, look for it. I will be diligent in getting it up by like Friday. Remember, as far as midterm second drafts, get them to me when it's like, but here's the thing about midterm second drafts, mein friends. If you're sending me the second draft, I want the first draft too. All right. Why would I want the first draft?
Oh,
To compare.
you wanted to see like
Yeah.
the correction, like if we did the corrections, and you want us to send your version of the draft, right?
Huh?
You want us to send your version of the draft?
Wait, I'm sorry. I'm interrupting you. I'm being rude. I'm sorry. What were you asking me?
So we send you the version of the draft that you corrected, right? Or do we send you a
Yeah.
blank draft?
Yeah, just send it as 2 attachments and just name them like, Filipov first draft, Filipov final draft, so I can compare them.
Okay.
And let's say Monday for that. Monday. And then people still need to get back to me about final projects. Let's get on that, please. It's Tuesday. Let's say you should have a proposal like, you know, in my email box by the end of the week at the latest, right? Because after that, we're like, you got like another week, you got another 9 days, really. So let's have proposals by Friday. All right.
But the second
And
draft is due Monday.
Greg, to answer your question, why I got you here, if you want to do that with that paper, I've done it before. I've done that in classes where I've taken the midterm and I fleshed it out into a final. But if you're going to do that, you
Okay.
need to do,
Really?
yeah, I've done, it's like, that's an option, but I mean, you're looking at me now like you want to change.
I know, no, I know. I'm not actually going
But
to.
I'm going to
But
tell you right now,
yeah.
it's like, and I'm going to do to you what teachers did to me. I'm going to tell you right now, if you just like tack on a couple pages, that's not going to cut it. It better be double the weight. All right, it's got to be double the weight, and if it's not about opening up, if you're not going to open it up into other avenues, if there's some extension of your thought in that, or if it's, I'm not saying that you're going to do this. All right, I'm not saying that, but it shouldn't be just this opportunity just to start repeating the obvious. You should get, if like you're going to do a part 2, it should be like the sequel. It should be expanding your ideas into new areas, and I should see like double the page count. That's all I'm saying. But can you do
Okay.
it? Yeah, do it.
Yeah.
But I want to see something there. We can
Mhm.
talk about it by email. All right. Any other questions? All right, let's call it a day. You guys were running it. So,
All right.
okay. So
See you later.
it's an interesting book, and unfortunately it's not Harry Potter. It's not Amelia Bedelia. It's not My Name is Ivan. I wish the one and only Ivan. I know it's not it's not Lord of the Rings. It's the Red Pill again. I'm sorry. You know, I'd like to tell you all that you're going to go to Hogwarts, and that the world is, and that there's lemonade coming in the river, but no. Sorry, no. All right, let's have a good day, guys. Have a good week.
All right.